Hello and a very warm welcome back to Widowed AF. You're here with your host, Rosie Gill-Moss. And joining me today, I'm going to be speaking with Rhiannon. Hello, Rhiannon.
Good morning, Rosie.
And welcome to the podcast. Now, just before we get going, I have been asked by the Alive husband if you would be kind enough to like and subscribe wherever you listen to our podcast. It just helps us get noticed a bit because we have a very high listenership, but we aren't really getting noticed. So if you would be kind enough to do that, dear listeners, we would be most grateful. But anyway, back to the matter in hand. So, Rhiannon, how are you today?
I'm okay, thank you, Rosie. Yeah, today's not a bad day.
So, full disclosure, Rhiannon and I have already spoken. We recorded a few weeks ago, but Rhiannon was on holiday, and unfortunately, the recording just didn't work out. So, I have actually heard your story already, which is quite an unusual situation to go into to do this. But I'm hoping it means that we'll both be a bit more relaxed, and I mean, I know what's coming, and it's one hell of a story. So buckle up, guys, pour yourselves a cup of tea, and I'm going to ask Rhiannon to start off from the beginning.
Oh, thanks, Rosie. The beginning, I suppose. Right, so start from the beginning of my relationship then with Leighton, who's my late partner. We weren't married. We met in 2019 and had a whirlwind romance that got very serious very quickly. And we moved in together in my home towards the end of 2019.
It was within 3 months, wasn't it? Or something?
Yeah, it was. And I mean, this is not me. I'm a bit older. I've had relationships in the past, and this was very much not how I normally go into relationships. But it was just, I don't know, one of those corny love at first sight, when you know situations. It got very intense very quickly.
You did put at the beginning in your application form that you weren't married, so were you even a widow? And I have already said this to you, but yes, categorically, of course you are. Anybody who's in a romantic relationship, whatever their sex, gender, identity, if you lose somebody you love in our world, you're considered a widow. So.
Thank you, Rosie.
So you've told me a little bit about Leighton, and he was kind of quite a vibrant character, wasn't he?
He certainly was.
Yeah. So tell our listeners a little bit about him.
So I mean, where do I start? There's so many aspects. He was just the most kind person, really, is how I would begin. He would give and do anything to anyone, and he had tons of energy. And he would always, direct that way where he felt it was needed, people in need, me looking after me when I was unwell. He was just incredibly kind. He was also one of the most intelligent people I think I've ever met, although not classically, hadn't been to university, but we would sit for hours and talk about all sorts of politics, geopolitics, lots of history, anything, you name it, he knew so much about. And he was also then incredibly physically capable. He could build things out of nothing. I'd come home from work and he would have completely and utterly done a DIY SOS on a whole room in the house and
wow,
built things from he was just.
You tell me he could cook, and then you're describing a perfect man, right?
He could cook as well. He was a dab hand in the kitchen too. Yeah, there was just pretty much perfect in all those aspects.
And now obviously things didn't stay perfect, and Leighton he struggled with his mental health, didn't he?
He did. So
is that something that you knew about when you began your relationship? Were there signs of it initially?
The signs were there. There were some sort of flags, and it was something that I'd spoken to him about from the beginning of our relationship and questioned. He'd never had anything diagnosed, but he'd had quite a traumatic life. So my kind of understanding was that he probably did have some kind of mental health condition. But he'd not ever really engaged with services and tried to, as men do, I think, keep it to themselves, try
Yeah.
to manage without talking about their feelings, which, as we know, I think is quite often a recipe for disaster.
Well,
So
you see it all the time in couple friends I have where perhaps they might be having marital problems or there's some issues going on and they're quite keen to pursue some therapy and the men are just like, no, don't want anybody
yeah,
knowing my personal business. And it's really common, and it's that sign of
indeed.
weakness and what will my mates think. It's changing, but it's not changing very
Not fast
quickly.
enough. And yeah, interesting you should say that. Actually, at one point during our relationship, when he'd had what I sort of refer to as an episode, when we were coming out of one of those at that point, one of the really difficult things was it would always be around his problems would always be around kind of attachment and insecurities and things. So our relationship was often a target of his mental health, if you like.
Yes.
He would become really insecure and concerned about our relationship and whether I was leaving him, and that was never ever in question. And that would sort of build into these intrusive thoughts in his head. So on a number of occasions, I'd even suggested, look, we'll go to couples therapy if you don't think it's a mental health problem with you, if you think it's our relationship, let's go to couples therapy. But again, it was, all those suggestions were swept under the carpet by him, and it's really difficult to try and get somebody.
You can't force somebody. You can't force somebody to go to rehab. You can't force somebody to go to therapy. You can put all the path work and the strategies in place, but if they don't want to do it, it's if you've got somebody in active addiction, you could force them into rehab, but they're only going to go back to it when they come out. It's
Exactly.
you have to walk through that door, don't you, or make that choice.
Indeed.
So talk to me a little bit about what happened, how you things how your relationship went on when things started to deteriorate. Just talk to me a little bit about what happened.
So obviously, in going into 2020, everyone went into lockdown. I think that probably had a profound effect on Leighton as well.
I'm not surprised.
We were both working. He was working in the building industry at the time. And he'd got into, I don't think we discussed this last time actually, he'd got into a bit of an argument with his employer around COVID restrictions and COVID rules in relation to being furloughed or working if you're not working a job that is necessary. I can't remember the term for it now.
I can't remember what the term was. It was
I should know. I'm one. I work in the NHS.
Oh my god!
But yeah, we all know what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was working in the NHS, and he was incredibly proud that I was doing that. And he was working in the building industry. And after the first couple of weeks of lockdown, when they sort of started opening up the workplace for non-essential workers, that's the word, essential workers.
Yeah.
So he questioned whether building new homes and things was actually essential work, and also questioned the COVID regulations that were put in place to allow them to socially distance and that sort of thing. And effectively what happened after that is, I think there was after he was sort of trying to whistleblow on that, he was managed out of the company in so many ways, and he lost his job. That was after a long period of being suspended. So he did spend lockdown at home. He was with my children most days whilst I was at work. But in about July, he had the last meeting where he was dismissed for misconduct, which I do believe was farcical. But
almost certainly, and because it's such a male, being the provider, being able to bring in money, and also it's very isolating being stuck at home.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're out at work, and he must have been worried about you working out in the NHS, particularly when we didn't know who it was going to take down and when.
No, I'm sort of thinking back at those days where I would kind of
strip at the doorstep
and run into the shower before touching anything or anyone. Really was strange times.
Dettol spray in your Amazon packages, I know.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, he lost his job then in July, quickly, again, I was worried about him, tried to talk to him about that. He was like, no, I'll be fine. I'll just get another job contracting, which he did. But there were some struggles around that, and he didn't have transport either. So we bought a little van that I got, just a little run around that he could use for work. And also we were going to try and kit it out and make a little stealth camper, because we like to get away, and we were still in this kind of weird lockdown, and that was the sort of things we would do. So we got this little van, and in September we'd gone away for a beautiful long weekend away just before the second wave of local lockdowns, or it was actually happening whilst it came into force whilst we were away, I think. He'd planned out this entire trip. I live in Wales, but in South Wales, and I'd never actually been to North Wales at this time, so that was something I wanted to do. And I'd said I wanted to go to the train station with a really long name.
Oh, I made you say it last time. You've got to say it.
Do you want me to do it again?
Yeah.
Llanfair pwll gwingil go gerish windro bo llantysilio go go go. So that was.
Sorry, I don't know if you know this, but my late husband spoke fluent Welsh.
Oh,
he was
really?
raised. They moved from Manchester to North Wales when he was young, and him and his brother learned. They obviously had an aptitude for languages because they both learned French as well. But they learned to speak Welsh because the old ladies would give them sweets because they were so touched that they could speak Welsh.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah, no, I remember you saying that they'd lived in North Wales, but I don't remember you saying they were fluent in Welsh. I'm not.
It's how they used to have covert conversations.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I digress.
That's okay. So off the back of me saying that I wanted to go there to the place with the longest name, he planned this whole itinerary of travelling all throughout Wales, north, east, south, west, mid Wales, to all the largest and biggest and greatest things that there are. So the highest waterfall, the biggest lake, the highest mountain, So he'd done all of that, and I had to do no planning, which is great. Yes. Well, this was Leighton. He was a man of extremes. So, and it was wonderful. And then we got back from that weekend. Well, no, we didn't get back from that weekend. When we were in North Wales and just about to return, the clutch packed in on the van, and we hadn't got roadside cover for the van. I don't know why. Talked about it, but didn't actually put it on the insurance policy or organise it, and thought, we'll be fine. It'll be fine. So there was no clutch on the van in North Wales. So I was doing my usual stress. What are we going to do? I've got work tomorrow, and he's like, babe, everything will be fine. I'll get us home. I will get us home, don't worry. And I didn't even know you could drive a car without a clutch or change gear without using a clutch. But apparently, if you get the revs just right and the speed just right to change gear, you can change gear without a clutch. So he's like, as long as we keep moving, or if we stop, I can sort of jump start it, in second gear and get it going. I'll get us home. And he did. He drove home from North Wales without a clutch on the car.
So he was quite good in a crisis then. He was quite...
Yeah, he was. I'm a worrier and I'm a panicker. So we complemented each other really, really well in that sort of sense. So, I'm pretty good at a crisis, but I'm a worrier and I'm an overthinker and I'm a planner.
Yes, I am.
And sometimes I plan so much that, things don't happen at all. Whereas Leighton's just, well, this has happened. We've got to get on with it. So let's see what we can,
kind of thing.
Yeah, let's see what we can do. And he did. He drove all the way home. But unfortunately, I think it was the day after we got back from that trip, he had a phone call to say that sadly one of his friends had taken their own life. And I think that obviously affected him quite deeply. It was somebody that I didn't know well. But he started to deteriorate, I would say, from that point, but that's obvious. You expect somebody to be sad and up and down when they've had that news. The following week, he was asked to host a sort of covert memorial celebration in his flat that he still owned in the centre of town, where he quite used to, when I was talking about him earlier, one of the things I didn't mention is he was really quite big on the sort of underground music scene where we live.
Okay.
He's a DJ and an MC, and he was well known for hosting sort of after parties and things at the end of the night on weekends, and yeah, having lots of fun there. So his flat basically was a party space. So the partner of his friend that had passed away had asked if he, because they couldn't have proper funerals, couldn't really, weren't supposed to get together.
Don't worry,
I'd
I
asked
won't
him
report
to,
you.
that's, we're gone are those days.
I think we're fairly
Look
good
what the
now,
politicians
knowing
did
what we know.
at that time. But yeah, that was the ask, and he was keen to do that. But I could see his mental health deteriorating over that week, and on that Friday morning, he really didn't want to get up and do this. So I sort of tried to say to him, look, you don't have to do that. If you're not up for it, you don't have to do it. Nobody will think any less of you. But he wanted to anyway. So he did, and yeah, he fell into what I would call one of these episodes with me on that night. Then, thinking that I was leaving him because I wanted to go home at about midnight. I was tired.
I was going to say, even that's a bit late for me these days.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And presumably there's some sort of recreational stimulants happening here, which is obviously not going to have a massively good impact on his mental health.
Did use cocaine on a semi-frequent basis. I wouldn't say it was an addiction. It was it was recreational,
a social crutch,
use.
Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And he did drink a fair bit, and I think all those things probably really were attempts to self-regulate or numb, or
When we spoke last time, I said, a lot of his behaviours are really reminiscent of ADHD. The sort of part,
absolutely.
the smiling clown. Is that the right analogy? where you're sort of the life and soul of the party, and things like the excessive drinking and drug taking. And you touched earlier that he had a very traumatic start in life, and that can lead to conditions like ADHD or very complex conditions.
Absolutely.
So, people with ADHD aren't very good at doing what's good for them. They tend to enjoy doing a lot more of what's bad for them.
Self-sabotage absolutely was definitely something that comes to mind.
Yeah.
And I knew some of that already, and at the time I'd spoken to him about it as well. I have a son with ADHD, and interestingly, he was a wonderful sort of stepdad to all three of my children, but the relationship that he had with Max, my middle child, who has ADHD, he won't mind me saying that on here, but I won't talk too much about that. But their relationship, their bond was, it was phenomenal. The two of them just had this wonderful spirit. Yeah. So it was definitely something that I queried with him at the time, and certainly still believe that to be the case now.
But even if he'd been prepared to pursue that option, we all know what the wait times are like. We all know that the treatment's screwed. My son has ADHD, and I'd like him to have the opportunity to try medication. But at the moment, they are just. I get a text sometimes saying my meds are out of stock till November, and I have to go through titration again. So
it's crazy.
Yeah.
So that was. So he'd had a complete meltdown, and I think this is probably something that I want to talk about, because when we do talk in general terms about mental health, and trying to support people with mental health, often if you've not seen that or experienced that, there's almost the platitudes of check in, ask someone if they're okay, and people think depression is what causes people to maybe have suicidal thoughts or take their lives. I don't think necessarily that's the full story, and certainly in Leighton's case, I think it was more this, a complete and utter. I've talked to other people in the suicide community. It's like they've had a heart attack in their brain. It's just gone bang, and things have just gone totally wrong in that wiring. Loss of impulse control, which is again what you have when you have ADHD or similar conditions. Completely out of control thoughts. I think he'd fallen into potentially a psychotic episode the night he died. And of course, if he was depressed and sad and really needing somebody to just hold and give him a hug all night, then that's what would have happened. You know, I'd done that with him plenty of times. But his behaviour wasn't manifesting like that. His behaviour actually, he wasn't him. He became dangerous. He became threatening. He became just a completely different person. And any attempts to calm that or resolve that with him was just making his behaviour and escalate, which was really frightening. So moving on from that, we were at my house the night that he passed away, the morning that he passed away, and he'd been, like I said, this had kind of been building over the days leading up to that, but nothing that you could actually act on. It was just causing a lot of tension between us, and any attempts, like I say, I was trying to make to pacify him or
It's like
support him
throwing oil on a fire, isn't it?
Yeah, really, really was. Or I'd just get silent treatment for hours and just be ignored. It was very, very strange. But yeah, the night that he died, there had actually been some movement the day before, and he'd had periods of being in a very good mood, a very jovial mood. He'd been painting that afternoon, he'd been painting the hallway and chatting to me about sort of plans to knock walls through in my living room and dining room. Let's do things this way. How about we check, because he was always doing this and that. Why don't we do this to the house? And I'm like, okay.
This is me, I'm afraid. This is me. John read the words. I have no idea.
There's still 7 projects on the go, Leighton. Can we get one of those finished first, please? It's great, but my head can't hold all this. I don't know how you can. So yeah, he was talking about that and everything was fine. And then about 10 o'clock in the evening, I said, I'm going to go to bed. And then his demeanour changed again very rapidly. And he began cycling through these really nasty, vicious, name-calling, delusional thoughts that were just coming out of nowhere that I couldn't resolve with him. And it went on and on and on for hours. And like I said, it escalated to the point where he was becoming really very threatening. My children were all in the house. You know, they're a bit older. I had one sort of actual adult child at the time who was 22, and 2 teenage children who were 14 and 16 at the time.
And were they aware that it was going on, or were they in bed?
I think they were, by the time that it had all escalated, I believe they were asleep. They were all in their rooms. I don't know whether they heard anything. Thankfully, they didn't come out of their rooms.
Yeah.
That was my worry, is that one of them would throw open my bedroom door and say, "What on earth is going on in here, Mum?" And because of
become
just
then the target of his rage.
Yeah. You know, at the point where he'd sort of, I don't know, I remember the one thing he'd said is that he was going to slit the throat of the next person that walked into. And I can just remember he said that, you know, very loudly, and I was thinking, gosh, if my eldest son comes up here now, what on earth could happen here? So I was like, this can't stay. We're not getting anywhere. I'm not helping you. You're not calming down. And it's a few times where he'd had similar, but nowhere near this level of episode in the past. What I'd learnt I needed to do was put space between us for, you know, half a day, let him cool down, and then go back, talk about it, and try and you know, get some resolution. And usually it would be fine. You know, it was normally me that felt a bit frustrated in the days afterwards, because he would almost try to ignore it had ever happened, and I would still remember and be thinking, yeah, but what about next time?
But how draining as well to not know when they're coming, and to live this kind of combined life, this almost Jekyll and Hyde life.
Absolutely.
I'm just I'm sort of, it must have been very difficult for Leighton. Of course it must, but for you, and I know that if I have a full meltdown, and if my son, who's also neurodivergent, has one, we don't always remember what happened. It's like I actually, when he was younger, I used to say it's a bit like an exorcism, because the demon would leave his body and my kid would come back. And so you're left with kind of the full knowledge of what happened, and he perhaps can't even remember doing it. And that
Exactly.
must be very, well, you're carrying all this burden. You're carrying everything right now. I'm feeling a lot for Rhiannon back then.
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, it was really difficult. I mean, I have to stress that these were episodic, and they would be a couple of days at a time, and then there'd be months of just my perfect man in between. So yeah, it's really difficult to live with that, and also now to try to remember that, you know, that person that was the majority of the time, like you said, just my perfect man. So yeah, and actually on that night, it's funny you should say that about the remembering, because when I had tried to speak to him over the sort of preceding days, when he sees the days leading up to that, he would forget or seemingly have forgotten what had happened. So I'd be upset, and he'd be, well, why are you upset about that? And I went, well, because of what you said and what you did. And he would point blank deny it. So I'm sort of thinking, am I being
So he wouldn't even acknowledge responsibility. That must be frustrating.
So, you know, it almost felt like I was being gaslighted at certain points then. So I'd actually started on the day before he died, I'd started to record some things that he was doing when he would dip into that, so that, you know, with the idea that when he had fully come out of it, I could say, look, you have to believe me that this is what happens when when this goes on. This is not right. You need help. Because that was, you know, that was always what I wanted to get to, was to get him help and support so that he could manage that, and we could live a happy life together.
The problem is, I guess, when it's not constant, when you're not constantly depressed, you believe that, oh, that's okay, that's done now. And I talked to my brother about it, because my brother and I both have struggled with mental health over the years, and we're like, yeah, we're not depressed, it's just some days we have suicidal thoughts. And you know, we can talk about it quite flippantly because he's my brother, but it's that not knowing what you're getting. And they're not a depressed person. It's just this kind of demon enters their brain every now and then and flips them. And I mean, I've never seen it happen apart from in a child, but I know how terrifying it can be. Just to see it like that. So yeah, you must have been very frightened.
It certainly was. It was frightening. So yeah, going back to that night, I'd made a decision, a clear decision then, that he needed to be removed from my home and spend some time alone to come down from that, that wherever he was. And I would resume conversations with him the next day. He'd had been drinking a bit as well, and we didn't have the van because that was still in the garage. So I'd said, I'll take you back to your flat. And I left the house and got in the car, because I knew that he would follow me if I just say, just knowing his behaviours and what to do. I knew he would follow me out to the car anyway. So he came out to the car, got in the car, and I began to drive him back to his flat, which is about a 20-minute drive from where I live. His behaviour again just continued to be changeable during the drive. He became very upset then when he realised that I that was what was happening. Again, it sort of probably feeds into his feelings of rejection and abandonment that he clearly suffered with. But I felt
You
and
have to
always did
protect
feel
yourself and your kids.
and how long do you I don't know, it's really, really difficult. But in my mind, as I've made a decision, you can't be here tonight, this is not resolving. I've reached literally the very end of the line of what I can do here. But during that car journey, things changed even more dramatically. He was opening the car door and threatened to jump out whilst I was driving, pulling the steering wheel, pulling the handbrake whilst the car was moving. Really nearly crashed the car a few times because of that. One point then, when I'd pulled over because he'd opened the car door, he ran out of the car and into some woods on the side of the road. And when he returned to the car, he had a blade in his hand and he had self-harmed quite significantly, from what I saw very briefly, on his leg. So at that point, yeah, the plan changed, and I was thinking, this is not like what we've had before. This is way worse. He seriously needs some help, and at least now there's something there concrete that I can go to a
Something
hospital
physical.
and say, yeah, he's not well. So I attempted to take him to A&E, but the car journey continued in a similar fashion, and he was pulling on the steering wheel, saying he wasn't going to go there, saying all sorts of things that really were just it's just really frightening and concerning, and saying that he, if you do that, it'll be the last thing I ever do. And basically the only option he was giving me was to take him back to my home, which I'd already said I can't do that in this situation. What else can I do? So it was going through my head, what do I do? How do I get him to the hospital in this state when he's refusing to go? It's not like he wants to get help, but he needs help. I tried to covertly dial 999, hoping that they would pick up a location, and sort of continuing to have conversations with him, but trying to make the things that I was saying alert the call handler at 999 to there being a serious problem, and hope that they would, follow that up. And then he pulled the handbrake at one point, and I stopped the car in the middle of the road where we were, and just thought, I've still got this 999 call open. It was a main road as well. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning though, so it was quiet, and not much on the road. But I thought, they will find me, they will see my car with the lights on in the middle of a 3-lane carriageway, and somebody will come and help
Somebody will
me
help
and
you.
sort this out and get him help. And sure enough, a police van came driving past on the other side of the road about 5 minutes later. And I beckoned them over and explained everything that had been happening over the sort of few days, and how it had been escalating that night, and said that I was trying to get him to the hospital, that he wouldn't go, and explained all of the events that had led up to where we were then. And they very quickly said, we'll help you. We'll take Leighton to the hospital in the van. You follow behind us. He was just wearing a dressing gown, nothing on his feet at this time. And they sort of, as they were checking him out before putting him in the van, which I now know is part of a sort of part of policy of safety, they sort of gestured towards the cord of his dressing gown, and sort of said, do you think this is safe to leave on him? And I said, no, I don't think it is. So they removed that from him before putting him in the van. And then, I drove behind them. And this is after, like I said, this has been going on since the day before. I've been awake for 24 hours now, and had at least 8 hours of constantly trying to manage this event that's been going on all night. So I think I was just exhausted by that time. And the sort of adrenaline must have just started to drain out of me when I got the relief that everything was going to be okay, and that I'd managed to secure the help that he needed so that he would be sorted. But that wasn't to be the case. We arrived at the hospital, and very quickly after I checked him in with the reception desk, Leighton changed behaviour again. He'd been quite submissive to the police officers initially, and quite quiet. They'd noted him being upset and crying, curled up in the fetal position in the back of the van, and he'd been quite acquiescent about going with them, despite how absolutely determined he was when it was just him and I alone that he wasn't going to go. But when they arrived, he didn't kick up any fuss about going with them. But when we got to the hospital, he switched again and started to become quite angry and rude to the officers, demanding his rights and asking them what rights they had to detain him there. And he began to film them with my mobile phone. And I just think that they must have initially read the situation right, to do what they did, but then made some very big judgments and assumptions then on arrival at the hospital. And their attitude just seemed to change on a pinhead. And they said that basically treating him like he was a time waster, and told him that he could go home. He walked out of A&E. I was in a state of like, what planet are we on? What do you mean? And I questioned them. They spoke to their sergeant over the radio to ask if there was any more they could or should be doing. But the response that I had was that he had capacity. He was choosing to not be there. That was up to him. They'd taken him to a place of safety, and there was nothing more that they could do within their powers as police officers to force him to get treatment. So if he wanted to go home, he should go home, and he should probably go home and just sleep it off, were the words that were used to me.
Wow. And this is this dismissive attitude to mental health, isn't it? It's pull yourself together, and essentially,
and particularly if it doesn't manifest as just as somebody who's desperately upset.
It manifests as anger, because I'm hearing like the caged animal type thing, where you get backed into a corner and you start sort of spitting and clawing, and not literally, and I felt like that when I went to A&E. Actually, I presented at A&E for some help once, and I ended up shouting at the staff, and they threatened to detain me and things, and it was really scary, and it was a very scary experience I would not repeat for my mental health. But there's a Mental Health Act, which the police had the powers to detain him, didn't they?
They did. So what we found later is that they absolutely did have the right to detain him, and Section 136 of the Mental Health Act is exactly what that is for. When somebody is in a public place and displaying signs of serious mental illness, the police can detain them if they are potentially a danger to themselves or a danger to others, which I when I was thinking about it at the time, I think he absolutely fits that criteria. He's already self-harmed. He's already nearly killed us both in the car.
He's in a dressing gown, bleeding and shouting. I mean, what more evidence do they need that this man needs mental health support?
Absolutely. But that was what they said, and we ended up, all of us, on the road outside A&E, with nobody else around, with these two officers just walking away. And he said, again, this kind of belligerent attitude that he had when they finally did say, yes, Leighton, we've already told you, you can leave, and you can go home. So, and he asked, he then asked them, well, how am I supposed to get home? Because I'd already said I'm not taking him home with me. I'd already made that perfectly clear.
Well, it was dangerous. You've had to put some boundaries in here. You
absolutely. I mean, I wish I hadn't now, but this is where
shoulda,
we
woulda,
are.
coulda, right?
Yeah. But that was exactly what I was doing at the time. I was putting safety boundaries in for me and my children. So everybody there was well aware that I felt that there was no way I could remain with him that night. So they told him to get a taxi. He said, well, look at me, just in my dressing gown. I haven't got a wallet. I haven't got a phone. How am I going to pay for a taxi? So their answer to that was, well, walk then, Leighton.
Brilliant.
And they started to walk away. And they continued to walk away. So at that point, it was October, it was raining. As much as I didn't feel safe. I thought, and again, trying to manage his fears around rejection and things like, love, I love you. I just can't be with you in this state. I will drive you back to your flat if that's the only option we've got, but I'm not staying there. So I drove him back to his flat, again, putting myself right back in that danger zone again, it felt. So and dropped him off at his flat. And the last time that I saw him, I was driving away and he was running down the road again, still barefoot, chasing after my car. And about 10-15 minutes after that, I was sort of driving towards home, but really just driving aimlessly because I was sort of just trying to process everything that had happened and how on earth was that allowed to happen? Why did that happen in that way? What can I do next? I've already called the police. They've told me that we're both overreacting. But after a few minutes of, like I said, processing everything, I was like, no, this is just not right. So called the police back. And I think, having listened back now through the inquest to those calls that I made, I can sort of could hear the desperation in my voice to be, to have this heard it for what it really was.
That must
having
have been very
said to them
difficult.
in
Back to the
quite
calls.
quite calm terms, which was one of the things I was criticised for, was that I
for being too calm?
Yeah, because when I was interacting with the police, I didn't seem too upset or too worried or too, I wasn't going screaming and shouting things because
one of you has to stay semi-sane, right?
Well, yeah, and that's
exactly
it. So I can remember at the time thinking I have to keep a cool head and explain everything logically so that they don't just see two completely, and think that it's a domestic situation where they've both been drinking too much or something like that. So that whole interaction, I was trying to just be factual, be calm, state the facts, tell them what I thought, in the same way that I would manage a crisis in work. Flipped into work mode really when I was, talking to them initially when we had the interaction before and at the hospital. But after I'd left and still was thinking, oh my God, they really haven't read this situation right. It's not safe to leave him. So I rang back, and I think they asked me what the concern is. And I think the first thing that I blurted out is that my concern is that next person that walks into his flat is going to find him dead. That is my concern, and it's a real concern. Because clearly me saying that he'd been threatening to kill himself on the way there hadn't been enough. So, I think by that point it was desperate language that I was, that I was using. So they dispatched the same two officers to go and do a welfare check. I decided that I needed to go back there as well. It's because if police were going to try and enter his property, it would probably, and I didn't want to leave him. The last thing I wanted to do was leave him, but I just couldn't be alone with him when he was so unpredictable and volatile. So I didn't want him to feel abandoned by me. He hadn't been abandoned by me, in my eyes, and that's something I'll always live with, is perhaps that's how he felt in that moment. But that was not the reality of it. So I went back and we tried to get in, and again, knocking windows, knocking doors. Couldn't get a response from inside the flat. They searched the area in case he hadn't gone back in there and had gone walking somewhere else. Still didn't seem to be a great deal of urgency from these two officers. And again, I probably wasn't making up enough fuss myself. I don't think. I was just being led, and I think by that point I was just like a rabbit in the headlights.
I was going to say you were probably just in autopilot. It's like these situations where the police come to tell you that somebody's died and you put the kettle on. It's you go into a strangely calm autopilot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think by that time, I'd had a meltdown internally. You wouldn't see it as outside to an outside, but I think I just, was it flight, fight or fawn? I think I just went
Fight or
into
flight, yeah.
fawn mode, and was like, right, okay, what do we do? So yeah, it was about 90 minutes all in all that we were outside the flat and couldn't gain entry. They did call for sort of more senior officers who were able to break and enter into the property for quite some time. Shift change, actually, funnily enough. And yeah, so 90 minutes after we'd... Oh, go on.
So I'm just going. So for 90 minutes, you're stood outside this flat, not knowing whether what state he's in.
Yeah.
You've got police officers there, and they're not breaking and entering.
No,
Is this because
they tried to kick the door? They bounced. They did manage to get during that time. So it's an old Victorian house with 3 flats over 3 levels. So there's like an outside door at the front that is the communal front door. So during that time, they'd managed to get in through the communal door. And then got to the front door of his flat, which was the ground floor, and tried knocking, shouting through the letterbox. Time, I really, it's only in afterwards when I've looked through the paperwork. So I think it was about 70 minutes in total by the time that they called for backup, and then 90 minutes by the time that the backup arrived and they actually got into the house, got into the flat. So yeah, for an hour they were dithering, and you had to kind of to go from the back of the flat to the front of the flat, walk out at the rear of the property, round another big Victorian house. So, there was a lot of walking back and forth from the front to the back, trying to prise windows open where they could. Yeah, they weren't not trying, but there just didn't seem to be a huge urgency. And certainly,
I'm just remembering my Victorian flat that sounds very similar, and I used to be able to kick the door in. So
yeah,
because I used to lock myself out all the time.
Yeah, but his actual flat door at the front was a composite door that he'd fitted there a couple of months ago, so there was no way that was being kicked through. I did think you could probably kick the back door in, and I'd suggested that to these officers at the time, but that hadn't happened. And again, we didn't know if he was in there. They kept saying, well, he could have gone wandering down the street. You last saw him outside, so we don't even know if he's there. And yeah, it was this weird, Schrodinger's cat situation, I suppose, at that time, until you find out what's in there. He's either in there or not in there. And in what state, you don't know.
Well, mine must have been all over the place.
But yeah, I mean, that was obviously my ultimate fear, is that he may have taken his own life in there. He had a history of... I knew of one episode in his past where he'd made a serious attempt on his life about 7 or 8 years previously, and it came to light afterwards that wasn't the only time either. There had been other attempts at various other points, but yeah, it was obviously... But that was my biggest worry. But in that moment, you're desperately just hoping that that's a stupid thought,
or he's gone out for a walk,
or just ignoring everyone, because that would be what he would do sometimes. So I don't know, but I just didn't want to entertain that thought, really. So yeah, and I think, like I said, I just found myself in this kind of frozen state, waiting for... I've done what I can do. I've got the emergency services, I've got the police. What more can I do? And hand over to them and hope that they do everything right, which... yeah, that didn't happen on the 2 sort of interactions, either at the hospital or later, really. But yeah, they finally did call for backup from the firearms team, not because they thought he had a firearm, but because they carry all of the equipment and are higher trained to break into properties with various different methods. And yeah, they got into his flat at around about 7:45 in the morning, and yeah, found him. I'd been instructed to sit and wait in my car about 20 minutes, half an hour before that, because there was nothing more that I could do, and I think they'd noticed that I was shivering and cold because I wasn't really dressed appropriately either. So they told
And
me to sit
shock.
and wait. Yeah, and shock, I suppose. So yeah, I saw the firearms team go to the back of the property and use their rammet device to smash the back door through. Um, and I think it was probably within about 10 or 15 seconds of that, I knew that something was desperately wrong, because had he been alive in there, I would have heard him probably making a lot of fuss over that. And I was hoping to hear lots of expletives, and
Expletives.
yeah, and didn't. There was just silence. And a couple of minutes later, female officer, walked past towards my car, but was about to walk past me, and I stopped her and said, "What's going on?" And you can tell, can't you? You can see it in people's faces, but you need to have the confirmation. And she said, my colleague will come and speak to you now. But I think I just demanded that she told me, because
Told
it was
you.
so obvious. And then, yeah, it was just like again, another avalanche then of, oh my God. And, that scream, that realization that the
Noise.
thing that you've been sat and worrying about for so long and don't want to believe might have happened, you've just had the confirmation that's happened, right? And yeah, it just, my whole world just bottomed out at that point, I think.
I'm so sorry. And the, yeah, like you say there, the worst thing that you can possibly imagine happening has just happened. And it's happened amongst such chaos, and I don't, can't, it just, it, it's not peaceful. It wasn't a
No,
peaceful end,
no,
was
that's
it?
it. And
And
that's, yeah, I think that's part of the added layer to this kind of grief, I suppose, is that and you hope that they were just totally not in their right mind to even realise, but at least when somebody dies a peaceful death, or even not a peaceful death, they don't die feeling alone and abandoned, and and like, for whatever reason, they are better off dead than alive. Um,
and it's got such a stigma, suicide. It's and John himself said, he always thought of it as being quite a selfish act. But as we've gone deeper into talking to the survivors left behind and looking into mental health, and how your own brain can just do such terrible things to you, and in the flick of a moment, a wonderful woman I spoke to in America whose husband was on the phone asking for help, and within seconds shot himself,
yeah,
because
I,
you
yeah,
can, reaching out for help and not getting it
yeah.
is
It
terrifying.
almost feels like, to me, I think, it's hope is the thing, and I know you've talked a lot about hope, um, but there must be something in the mind. What the minute that hope seems to be completely lost is when it becomes the seemingly sane or right thing to do, which it obviously isn't. Um, but I think, and certainly having had my own battles since, and I'm not. I suffered dreadfully in the months after Leighton passed away. And interestingly, survivors of suicide bereavement are much more likely to die by suicide themselves. I didn't know that
Gosh.
before. So and I had my own brushes with those thoughts, and I've not never had them before, but never to the point where I really could have acted on them. And I think that did, and it to me, it seemed like the hope that life could be okay or better, or that these thoughts and pain, because I can remember being in such
Physical
physical
pain.
pain, that I just wanted that to stop, and couldn't couldn't compute in my mind that I would have to live another day in that amount of pain. And yeah, I think for a lot, and having spoken to a lot of people in the suicide bereavement community since, there does seem to be that moment, whether rightly or wrongly, you feel like hope has just completely eluded you. There's no way out of the situation you're in. There's no way to calm those demons in your head. There's no way, whatever it is that is the sort of, I suppose, trigger to put you in that state. It seems to me a lot of the time is that sense that there is no more hope left, that seems to allow people's brains to do that to themselves, because we are wired for survival. It's completely against every survival mechanism in our body. So to think that it's selfish, or you have to look at it as an illness and we don't understand the
It's a
brain.
terminal illness sometimes, isn't
absolutely.
it? It is.
Yeah.
And you talk about feeling some elements of guilt, about leaving him, about taking him to the flat, and I don't know if I'm even in a position to alleviate you of guilt. I'm not a priest. It's not confession, but if I can in some way tell you that I don't think you deserve to feel guilty. I think that you deserve to feel pride in how much you cared for this man and how
Thank you.
valiantly you fought for him. And I think that guilt it's a very difficult emotion to shake off, but I don't think you deserve it. I really don't. I think that you were fighting a battle with a man who was battling himself, and I just wish that it had been handled better. I wish that he got the help he needed, and I wish that you were, although I don't mean to be disrespectful, not sitting opposite from me now and telling me the story of how the love of your life died, because it never gets any easier to hear it, and it certainly never gets any easier to experience it. Have you had therapy and things yourself? Are you quite sort of proactive?
I mean,
Or you might
again,
be.
it'd been something that I'd spoken to Leighton about whilst he was alive, to do that for himself. So obviously, and I knew quite early on that I said, and again, I was reaching out to mental health services when I could see myself in crisis, and it was even more triggering then that you can't get help after you've just lost somebody to suicide, and you're begging them and saying, I am in trouble here.
I'm
I'm
desperate.
lucid now in this moment, but I'm telling you that I keep having periods where I'm frightening myself because I'm losing it. And, all those things that you're telling me about protective factors, the fact that I've got children and people who love me, those those are apparently protective factors. But I'm here telling you that yes, here in this moment, they are protective factors. But last night at 3 o'clock in the morning, when those intrusive thoughts were taking over my brain, they didn't matter at all. It's not that they didn't matter. They just, they weren't they just didn't come into the equation. So yeah, trying to get help on the NHS afterwards was even more triggering. So I had private therapy. For quite a long time with a wonderful, wonderful private therapist that specialises in suicide grief, and she's also got personal experience of suicide in her family. So yeah, she was wonderful, and she'd also been learning and in the process of training in EMDR whilst I was under her care, and she very kindly used me as a guinea pig for her training for EMDR.
How did you find it?
It was, I think it helped. It's certainly not like the panacea that is bandied around. I don't think that it's almost going to instantly fix these traumas and help. But it definitely did. I noticed that I wasn't anywhere near as I was suffering terribly with constant panic attacks, and that would usually be how things would spiral and escalate. I'd have a panic attack that I just couldn't stop, and they were like, more than daily, several times a day.
And they're exhausting as well.
Yeah.
They leave you feeling like you've run a marathon.
Absolutely. So yeah, in terms of the physical side of sort of those trauma responses, I definitely think the EMDR helped with that. Yeah, it's difficult to know, but there was an improvement
I think you
in a lot of
sometimes
my
throw so
symptoms
much
from
at
there.
it, you're not quite sure what's
Don't know what, yeah,
working,
what
right?
is it, or yeah, and is this time as well? Because this all went on, it's about 8 months in total. I'd had quite intensive therapy and these sessions of EMDR with her. So it may have been that time helped as well a bit. I don't know. It doesn't normally, I don't think, when you speak to
But
people.
having somebody that you trust to talk
Yeah.
to, I've had the same therapist for 2 years now, and I know nothing about her. I know nothing about her. She knows the entirety of my life, and it's a very peculiar dynamic to have. But the trust is there now, and I've
Yeah.
been driven there and walked into the room on occasions, but most of the time
Mm.
I drive myself there, I go in, and I don't know if you saw yesterday, I did my first Zumba class actually. There's a Zumba class opposite my counselling straight after.
Oh wow.
And I just feel like that might be a really good way of letting out the emotion that's been raised. I did it once. We'll see
Yeah.
if I ever do it again.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that kind of conversation about actually having to be physical to
Oh yeah,
let some of that out, isn't there?
it's something like if it's your brain, you need to like. It's where you feel it, isn't it? Depends on what you need to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
I'm vaguely aware of this concept. I should probably dig a bit deeper. But Rhiannon, what does life look like for you now?
um I'm back in work. I'm just plodding through every day. I'm trying to, I think at the beginning of this year, I kind of reached an all-time low, really. I'd come out of that real panicky, all of those sorts of symptoms and not being able to function, to probably just functioning, and being able to appear like a
Yeah,
functioning member of society for maybe a year and a half.
like a puppet.
Um, yeah,
I used to feel like a puppet, like my strings were being pulled and I was just
yeah,
sort of going through the motion.
absolutely. And the beginning of this year, I'd kind of thought, yeah, Christ, I've just turned 40 or 41, however old I am now, I can't remember. I can't live my life like this, or, my entire life like this. So I just by chance, I'd been away with some really good friends to the Outer Hebrides. Um, Quite a few friends in Scotland. I'm going there tomorrow actually. But we'd gone on a holiday to the Outer Hebridean Islands, and I'd gone for a swim. This was in April, in the North Sea, which was absolutely
Ooh,
freezing. And then when I got back, just by chat, I've always loved the sea. I live by the sea, and it was part of the reason I bought my house on the coast, is that I do love the sea, but I've never been in a group or anything before. And I hadn't actually been back in the sea after Leighton died, until I went off the coast of Tiree, in Scotland. So yeah, I got back, and just by chance, a local swimming group popped up, and I thought, oh, okay, maybe I'll try that. And it's been life changing, absolutely
so
life
pleased.
changing. So yeah, I've met a whole bunch of new people, because of course that's something else that happens when you lose somebody. All those
Mm-hmm.
secondary losses. All of my sort of friend network and a lot of all of his friends certainly drifted away.
And people
Um,
don't know how to deal with you, do they?
yeah,
They tend to just back away.
yeah.
Oh,
So
oh,
yeah,
I
I've met
love
a
that you found
whole
open water
beautiful.
swimming.
Yeah, it is, and it's incredible. I've just finished doing an October challenge, because it's obviously, as I said, he died in October 2020. I suffer with like seasonal affective disorder anyway, always have. So the winter months for me are always really challenging.
Yeah.
So I just took up Surfers Against Sewage challenge to do a dip a day in October. So just finished doing that. So that was,
Oh, I
yeah,
bet
that was,
that was brisk some days.
it can, yeah, it can, no, but you get used to it. I mean, so you've got
I cold water.
the
Yeah, I
cold
do
water
cold water therapy.
tank as well. I've just got myself one of them for the house as well.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, haven't really given it a good whirl yet, because I said I've got the sea on my doorstep. So unless it's really, really, dangerous, weather out
Dangerously
there,
wavy.
then I
Wavy.
can just generally go to the sea, which is, I'm very lucky like that.
I used to
But
live
yeah, you
fairly
get
near the
used to that.
sea. And
Yeah.
I do miss when we moved here. I mean, I was so close. I was 20 minutes from the sea, but I do miss it. But for a long time after Ben died, I wasn't able to get in it. But
Well,
I
for
can
obvious
now.
reasons,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and I won't go in choppy waters. Even when I went paddleboarding the other day,
Mm,
as soon as the wind picked up, I was out.
yeah,
But that's natural. Excuse me.
yeah,
But I hear so much about these communities of often women who go to these sea swimming groups, because from what I can infer from them, what you've got is a load of people wanting to make themselves better. So
yes.
every person there, has made a choice that they're going to put their body in cold water
Hmm.
in order to help their mental health, their physical
Yeah.
health, whatever their driving factor may be.
Hmm.
They are doing it because they want to make improvements. And I
Yeah,
don't mean like, slaving in the gym and things like that. It's normally about mental health. And
yeah,
Lulu, when I went in on my birthday, she said, "What do you want to do on your birthday?" And my birthday's in March, and Lou lives in Felixstowe. And I was like, "I want to go into the sea. I want to get into the sea with my two best mates and my husband." And we did it, and it was invigorating. And I think it was that kicked off my desire to do this cold
yeah.
water therapy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's just been incredible. And like, yeah, absolutely what you said about the people, because that makes it as well. I'd never really realised just how much that camaraderie is all part of it. Like I said, I've got the sea on my doorstep. It's literally 2-minute walk from my house, and I've always spent time in the water. But when the kids were growing up, it'd just be me and the kids, or me on my own. And you certainly wouldn't want to be staying in the water or doing too much without
no, it's not a safe practice on your own,
yeah,
especially in the winter.
absolutely. So no, so we do, and there's a big group. There's always
You got to go in on Christmas
somebody
Day.
there. I will. Yeah, I should
Yeah.
imagine. I've got to look at my rota. I don't know if I don't think I'm working Christmas Day. We normally have a big New Year's Day one here. I think I'm working nights New Year's Eve though. So if I
Oh
can
gosh,
manage, I'll
that'd be
come
fun.
straight from work. But yeah. I'm sure I will go in on Christmas. Yeah, on Christmas Day or around and about. But yeah,
Well, good on you.
it'll
I
be
think that's.
great.
I think that I often talk about the guests that we have on this show, because in order to come here and tell your story, you've got to have gone through a journey yourself. You've got to be a particular type of person. And I wanted to just mention the fact that you talked about your own suicidal ideations and dark thoughts and ruminations, because these are things that need to be talked about. The first time I told John that I had these ideations, he reacted quite viscerally. He was like, "Don't ever say that." And then I sort of wrote down how I felt and how the importance of being able to vocalize it meant that the chance of it ever happening diminished.
Yeah.
Because you don't mean it. I don't want to kill myself. Of course I don't.
No.
But in that moment, you feel so hopeless. And I have to say the HRT has made an enormous difference to me.
Really.
The lows are much lower. I'm feeling hugely better. But we do need to talk about it. We do need to talk about that. That thought goes through your head without people recoiling. So I think it takes enormous guts to say those words. And you've got guts in abundance, Rhiannon, haven't you, my love? But thank you for twice taking the time to talk to me. I could hear you a lot better this time, so I did get much more of your story,
That's
because
good.
we kept dropping it. Yeah, trying to do it from Albania didn't work for us, did it? But thank you for coming back on, and thank you for telling Leighton's story. And it's the idea that it can happen to anybody. It's not restricted to strangers and films and BBC dramas. And we know that talking about it helps. So thank you. I think that you should be really proud of yourself. I hope
Thank you. Thank
will
you,
you let your
Rosie,
kids
for
listen back?
having me. Pardon?
Will your kids listen to it, do you think?
I don't know. We most of the things that I do sort of in relation to all of this is not
No.
they're not
No,
that one. They don't want to. They may.
Yeah.
I don't know. But
Well, I just think
we'll
they're
see.
out there, aren't they? If they want to in the future, they can listen.
That's it.
And
Yeah.
my eldest, I don't think he knew how close we sort of protect him, how close John came to dying. And I said, oh, and actually, what did he say to me the other day? He'd found some notes that John had made when he was doing his episode, and he sort of said, oh, I don't know if I should have looked at them, because it's obviously about Sarah's demise.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, I didn't know all of that." And I thought, "Oh, I suppose you wouldn't, would you?" We protect them from quite a lot of things. Anyway, I'm rambling. I'm going to let
No,
you go,
that's
my darling.
fine.
But thank you for sparing the time to talk to me today, and
Thank
for
you.
being so brave.
A
And have a
little bit more
wonderful.
cohesive this time. It
Yeah, it
felt like
worked
we were
much better.
going off so many tangents last time. So
I was
yes.
looking forward to John trying to edit like the 3 or 4 different variations of. No wonder he
Two
said.
neurodivergent brains trying to do
Yeah.
something together, because I'm pretty certain I've got a splash of spice in there
All
somewhere as well.
neurospicy, that's my favourite term, and I think all the best people do. So I think you tend to be drawn to people like yourself. I think the best people are. It's what they call it, human 2.0. That's what they neurospicy are.
Excellent. I like
Anyway,
that
on
term.
that note, I am going to sign off today, and
Yes.
I'm going to send all of you listening out there lots of love. If you have any questions relating to today's episode, please do direct them to myself, to John. I can even ask Rhiannon for you if she's willing to answer. So
Of course.
episodes surrounding suicide are very difficult, because nobody wants to believe that can happen. But as I've just said multiple times, the more we talk about it, the better. So for now, thank you, Rhiannon, and to the rest of you, keep
Thank you, Rosie.
plodding on.